Late Night Review. Welcome back, subscribers. Today is the summary for Karen Reed's trial, day number 12. First on the stand today, we have a continuation of Julie Nagel. She is back on the stand. I guess they didn't get to finish with her yesterday, so we continue with her. Today, the word object is what's being used today by Mr. Lowry to describe what Julie saw on the front lawn, as she was describing it yesterday as a black blob. He also has described that it was 5 to 6 feet long. Now, as for the sizing that she is now stating, it being 5 to 6 feet long, defense was able to ask her about the description of the size. She agreed that this was the first time she was to ever use that description of 5 to 6 feet long. And the first time she ever used it was now in front of the jury in court. So she had never used it prior to this as a description of what she saw. And she also stated that she realized the next day after finding out that John O'Keefe had died in Albert's front yard, that she said she put it together that that object she saw that night on her way home was a body, and it was Mr. John O'Keefe. However, she was questioned about that and asked if she contacted 911 when she put this together. Did she contact the police when she put this together? Did she contact any law enforcement at any point from the time that happened of January 29th at 1:45 when she went home in the morning to trial now? I think, what is it? It's been like a year and a half or so since this incident took place. A year and a half later, did she contact anybody to tell them she put it together the following day that this was John O'Keefe's body that she had saw that early morning? And she said no, she didn't. She had never talked to anybody about that size until she talked with the prosecuting attorney, Mr. Lowry, and the first time she ever said it to anybody was in court. The next person on the stand is Terry Kuhn. She works for UC Davis of the veterinarian genetics lab in the forensic unit. Her job title is forensic scientist, DNA technical lead. She's worked there for 24 years, just over 24 years. She received a swab test from the state police to test for DNA, specifically to test for canine DNA. Their test runs to test for dogs, cats, bison, goat, sheep, rabbit, pig, horse, cattle, mouse, and rats. And while doing her test on the sample that the state police sent her, she got a negative testing result for canine DNA. However, she did find pig DNA on the swabs. So she didn't receive an actual piece of clothing. She received literally a swab from something. We don't know. She doesn't know. She says she knows nothing about what sample is coming from, what it was tested on, what it was exposed to, if there were any inhibitors that could have touched the sample to change the results of the DNA test. However, what she was sent was 2 swabs, if you don't know what a swab is, so it's kind of like a Q-tip, and she tested that and she got a negative for canine DNA. However, when Mr. Jackson of the defense side questioned her, found out that she did not take the swabs herself off of the object. She just received the actual swabs. She said that sometimes when they get samples to test, they do receive like an article of clothing or whatever it is that they're testing. So she swabs it herself, takes a photograph of where in the object she's swabbing from, and it gets circled so that way they know exactly that it came from this spot and not this spot on the item. She said they don't always get samples that way. It always just depends on however the item is processed and sent to them. All they do is process what is sent to them. She did 2 tests. However, through questioning of Mr. Jackson, it was realized by us as the viewer that although there was no canine DNA present in her test, it doesn't mean that canine DNA wasn't present. How does that happen? It happens because, as she describes, there are different types of inhibitors that can prevent the visualization of that DNA, such as blood or dye, and which Mr. Jackson pointed out that both was from an object that had been exposed to blood and dye. And she was asked, would these types of things inhibit what you are seeing? And she said, I can't tell you what was on the swab other than what I saw. And she continuously didn't want to answer the question directly because Mr. Jackson wasn't asking her, did you see that these came from there? It wasn't like those type of questions. It was just, if a sample came to you and it was exposed to these things, is there a way to tell that they are exposed to these things? And she said, no. Can you tell if you swabbed this part of the shirt and DNA was over here on this part of the shirt, would it show up, cross somewhere on the garment? Would it show up if you swabbed down here? And she said, no, there's no way to tell, that they don't have that type of testing, but it's a great question. In this particular case, this object or this swab was just sent to her with no information outside of that. However, we as viewers finding out through defense's questioning that this swab should have been, I guess you could say, marked for exposure to blood and dye inhibitors, and it wasn't. So you have to factor in all of these variations. So the fact that this swab itself and not a piece of the object itself was sent, for myself, flags me. Since this is all we have to work with, we do have to factor in the fact that it did have inhibitors, which does cause a block that there could be canine DNA, but she could only find pig DNA. However, how pig DNA resulted on this test, we have no clue. One question was asked, and could it come from eating something such as food that was pig? Yes, it could. Could it come from a dog's mouth who was eating a treat that was from a pig? Yes, it could come from that as well. So it's totally up to you if you want to believe the results straight as they are, which you should, because that is the results. However, you also need to factor in all these different types of scenarios. Another great question that was asked by Mr. Jackson, the defense attorney, was if an object had fallen to the ground, could it pick up then the DNA from whatever it had fallen to? And she said she has no idea. They've never done testing like that to see if that's transferable DNA. She was also asked about the collection of the sample. Would it matter how it was collected? She said she herself can only work off what is given to her, right? As we already know that. So she said she has to assume that the swabbing was done properly from the lab that she received the sample from, which would include using a sterile swab with sterile water, allowing the swab to dry completely, and packaging in paper and storing it at room temperature before sending it to them. We slightly know a little bit more information as viewers of this trial because we also had learned how the police collected the sample off of John O'Keefe's body. They were using the leaf blower to move the snow and then collected it in those solo cups and then put it into a paper bag. Okay, so we know this information on how this was collected. Of course, as you just heard, how she said all of this stuff has to be assumed that it is done properly with sterilization, drying, using sterile water, so on and so forth. She can only process what is given to her and assume that all of these steps had been taken. Now, Mr. Jackson did ask questions and tried to ask questions about would a solo cup affect this? Would putting it in a shopping bag, would, all the stuff that we already know. However, Mr. Lowry from prosecution objected to all of those questions, and I'm not quite sure why Judge Beverly sustained all of those objections, so we didn't actually get to find out that information. However, you are left to figure that out on your own based off of the information Miss Terry gave you, as well as the information we already know from the trial. So next on the stand, we move on to Ryan Nagel. And this is Julie's brother. As you remember, Julie is the one that was riding in the vehicle with Matthew and Jennifer McKay when she drove past that night the lawn and saw the black blob on the front lawn. She's also the one who came out when her brother went to pick her up. She came out to the vehicle and then asked her brother and the friends if they wanted to stay. They said no, so she went back in and then they left without her. So this is Ryan Nagel. He's being questioned now because obviously he had showed up to the house to pick his sister up that night. He said he arrived at the Albert home around 12 o'clock a.m. He said it took about 2 minutes from the time he messaged her to tell her he was there for her to come out to the truck and go back. He said that he had saw a black SUV parked in the front of the Albert's home out on the street and saw only one person in the vehicle at the time, and that it was a female in the driver's seat. He also saw the black SUV drive away. He said he never saw it back up or hit anyone, nor did he see anyone laying on the ground as he drove past the Albert home. He said he was watching to make sure his sister got back inside the home safely as he drove away, so they weren't like speeding away. They're driving fast enough, yet slow enough to make sure she made it back inside the house safely. He said he wasn't looking at the lawn particularly because he was watching to make sure his sister made it in. However, at this time, there wasn't a lot of snow on the ground just yet. Everybody has been describing at this point that there was just a dusting on the lawn. That's pretty much what we got out of Ryan. I honestly feel like Ryan was the first person who gave us like honest testimony. Like he had some things he forgot, but they sounded legitimately forgot. And it wasn't just like, I don't know, I forgot. So, I could be completely wrong. Maybe you just lied the whole time, but honestly, after seeing everybody else who's testified on the stand so far, he has seemed like the most honest person that's gone on the stand so far. Saying as of the witnesses. Heather Maxim was put on the stand. Heather is Ryan Nagel's now ex-girlfriend. At the time, she was his girlfriend, and she was in the vehicle that night when Ryan went to pick up his sister, Julie, at the Albert home. She said that she saw a vehicle coming their way as they were pulling onto the street, and she saw a male and a female in the car. She said the female was driving and the male was in the passenger seat. And she said that when they drove away, Heather, Ryan, and Richard all drove away in the vehicle, that she only saw a female inside of the vehicle. And she said she was able to see inside the vehicle because the dome light inside of the car was on. So you're not to just then assume or exclude that the male wasn't in there. She's just saying she only saw the female in there at that time. She was also asked if she ever saw a male walk away from the vehicle, and she said no, she didn't. So that's all we got out of her. Richard Dono was the next one on the stand. Richard is the driver of the truck that went to pick up Julie. So he was the driver. Julie's brother Ryan and Ryan's girlfriend at the time, Heather, were passengers in Richard's truck. He said he did see a black SUV in the front of the Albert's yard, and he never saw it move. And he didn't notice any damage to the black SUV, nor did he notice anyone get out of the SUV. He was also asked if he spent any time on his phone while he was waiting for Julie to come out and talk to her brother Ryan. As naturally most people do when they're just sitting waiting, they'll take out their phone, scroll through it or whatever until time to go again. So he said he doesn't remember specifically doing that, though he wouldn't rule it out as something he had done. So you're then to conclude on your own that it's possible that someone got out of that black SUV and he just didn't notice, or maybe someone didn't get out of the SUV and he just didn't notice. Either way, you have to factor all this stuff into what you conclude. The next one on the stand was McKay, and she is Matt and Jennifer McKay's daughter. Now, she and her friends were the ones that picked up Colin Albert that night. He is the one that was in the home that left right after Nicole Albert got home, and she said she didn't tell anybody in any report anywhere that he was there because he had left right after she got there, and she didn't consider him as part of the group that was at the bars, so she didn't mention him as being at the home. We learned from Allie that no investigator ever asked to see her phone or a screenshot of the conversation between her and Colin Albert, because she was the one that went to pick him up that night. And so it was a screenshot of their conversation between the two. She also stated that at no time in that year did anyone ask to see her phone or see the conversation. We'll take a look at that video footage.
The information on that screenshot actually existed on January 29th, correct?
Correct.
Did you tell your mother, Jennifer McKay, that you had that?
I was never asked.
Jennifer McKay.
Objection. Sustained.
It's fair to say that on January 29th, 30th, 31st, you did not turn over that screenshot to any law enforcement official, correct, of 2022?
No, I was never asked.
No investigator from this case ever asked you for copies or a copy of that screenshot of that text message conversation on January 29th, 30th, or 31st, correct?
Correct.
They also did not ask you for a copy of that screenshot through the whole month of February, correct?
Correct.
In fact, all of 2022, no investigator ever approached you to say, can I have a copy of that screenshot, correct?
Correct.
And in addition to that, you never called an investigator to say, hey, I have a copy of the screenshot of the text message conversation that I had with Colin Albert, correct?
No, it wouldn't have been relevant at that time.
Okay.
I believe, because Colin was not at the house and wasn't introduced as being there until later.
So your testimony today is that at no time in the year 2022 did you consider it relevant at all that you had this screenshot of this text conversation, correct?
Correct.
So with this particular screenshot since it was a screenshot that wasn't received or reviewed right away, and since it was a screenshot and not a view of the actual conversation, it was brought up that messages in the conversation could be deleted, and if you change your time zone, that it also changes the timestamps within the message. She says she didn't change anything since no investigator actually did any kind of extraction from her phone. We're left with just a photograph of this conversation. Judge Beverly usually gives a statement to warn people about any kind of technology like cell phones that are being used as evidence. And in this case, she again used the statement to remind the jurors, you must find first it's more likely true than not that the information you're reviewing is what it is. It is between these two people. And if you do not find it to be true, you cannot consider it to be true in your deliberations. So that's usually the warning she gives, and she gave that in this instance too with Allie's screenshot. Allie McKay is tracked through an app called 360. I don't know anything about the app 360. What I know about it is what I learned through this trial. And it's apparently an app that parents use to track their children to see wherever they're at, and the app tracks everywhere they go and the speed they go, and it tracks it by time and by location and distances. So it gives a summary of they were moving at this speed for this distance, so on and so forth. So it is Allie McKay's testimony that after dropping off Colin, that she went home for the night. On the app, it shows that she was within the circle of, her home on the app, on the map, but it shows that she went other places and drove around and actually didn't return home until later on that night. However, she does maintain that she doesn't remember going anywhere outside of going home after dropping off Colin. Now, it's unfortunate that Mr. Lowry was allowed to lead Allie in questioning, and I'm not quite sure why Judge Beverly allowed it other than what we know of Judge Beverly. But it's not total all negative on Judge Beverly, because she has done some pretty normal things as a judge would do. It's just when she does that really weird stuff, it just really sticks out. So either way, I don't know why Mr. Lowry was allowed to lead her in his questions so she could go along answering it. So let's take a look at that now.
What, if any, knowledge do you have as far as the accuracy of sort of the timestamps that are contained within that app?
Well, I'm not sure, but on the photo he showed me, it says like turn Wi-Fi on. So that like remind Allie to turn Wi-Fi on. So that could have affected the accuracy.
And that was on literally every single one of the alerts that was on that page that showed you?
Every single one.
Now, Canton High School, do you know what street that's on?
Washington Street, I believe.
And
yeah.
About how far a ride is it from Canton High School to your house?
7-8 minutes, 10, I'm not sure.
You were in the bubble, Canton High School at 1:28 in the morning. Could you have possibly been in the bubble of your home at 1:30 in the morning?
No.
And unless you were going 9 miles an hour in a snowstorm?
No.
Now, you were asked some questions about that time frame of August of 2023 when you were asked and you turned over some screenshots to troopers from the state police, correct?
Correct.
You were asked about previous times indicating that you weren't asked and it wasn't relevant, correct?
Correct.
Now, do you know why you were asked in August of 2023 versus any prior time period?
Because Colin Albert wasn't in the house, and then it was brought up here that he was.
And brought up where?
By the defense.
And around that time of August 2023?
I believe so, yes.
That's all we have for Allie, and so next on the stand is Colin Albert. So the last person on the stand today is Colin Albert. Colin Albert is Julie and Chris Albert's son. Colin Albert ended up at Brian Albert and Nicole Albert's home that night after being at one of his friends' homes. Friend's name was Mike. He said he drank there for a while and then got a ride over to Brian Albert Jr.'s house, which is Nicole and Brian Albert's house. And from there, when he was visiting there, he also drank some more alcohol. He then messaged Allie